Hey, 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 welcome to Studio Classroom on the Air. I know your English will improve today. My name is Gabe. Now, one of the things that Americans notice when they come to visit Taipei is how little you have to pay for a good quality and delicious meal. And I'm not talking about buying food from the supermarket to make at home. I'm talking about eating out. It is very rare in the United States to get a sufficient lunch for under $5. But with things like biendang, that's totally possible here. Now, our lesson today is about the cultural differences of eating out. And with so many cheap options for eating out, many would rather eat out than make food at home, especially people without children to feed. This, of course, affects the culture and what you can expect to see as you walk through the streets of whatever country you're in. Today's lesson is in the form of a letter from a girl to her grandparents. Hey, when was the last time that you wrote your grandparents a letter? Maybe you could do that right after today's lesson. But I know you have your magazine open. It's time for us to begin.
Cultural differences of eating out. Not everyone eats out the same way. Margaret has been living in Taipei for several weeks. She's an exchange student from America. She writes a letter to her grandparents about some cultural differences she's encountered when eating out. Dear Grandma and Grandpa, as you may have heard from my parents, I'm in Taipei right now on a cultural exchange program. I'm enjoying my time here very much. I have made new friends here, many of whom are locals. Through my interaction with them, I've noticed some interesting cultural differences.
Rebecca and I are ready to have a nice little snack here just as soon as we're finished today's lesson because we're talking about eating out. So, Rebecca, are you getting hungry?
Oh, I'm hungry. I love to eat. I really like to cook at home, but I also enjoy eating out. And you know, one of the most interesting things about living in Taiwan for me has been noticing the cultural differences of eating out.
Okay, you mean the differences between Taipei and where you're from in California?
Virginia, the United States, yes, because it's actually quite different.
Right. Well, maybe you can share a little more details with us as we go along. Our lesson will give us some details as well. But we read here, not everyone eats out the same way. So if you haven't had a chance to leave your home country to go travel somewhere else, then you might not have had a chance to observe this yet. But it's true. It's one of the things that you will notice if you go to another country, how people eat, what their habits are, and how they eat out.
Exactly. Well, we read at the beginning of our lesson, Margaret has been living in Taipei for several weeks. She's an exchange student from America, so she's here in Taipei studying as an exchange student. She writes a letter to her grandparents about some cultural differences she's encountered when eating out.
Okay, so of course she begins by saying, Dear Grandma and Grandpa, as you may have heard from my parents, I'm in Taipei right now on a cultural exchange program. So, before we continue, let's take a look at a phrase right there in that sentence, her first sentence, as you may have heard from my parents. Okay, when would you use this phrase, may have heard? When you're unsure if someone has heard or not. Maybe they've heard, so as you may have heard, and then you share a fact with them.
For example, you could say to a friend, you may have heard, but I wanted to tell you in person, I'm moving to New York.
All right, that's big news, right? If someone's moving, or maybe someone is leaving your office, and some people know, and so maybe the news got around to you. As you may have heard, I'm quitting soon. That's just an example sentence. Sometimes I hear people use the word probably. Do you ever hear that, Rebecca? As you probably heard, right?
Oh, yes, I definitely hear that. So that's another word that you can add to this phrase. You probably have heard, or you may have heard, but maybe you haven't heard yet.
And so Margaret's grandparents, they've probably heard from Margaret's parents that she's doing an exchange program in Taipei. I'm enjoying my time here very much. I have made new friends here, many of whom are locals. And I have to say, I've met a lot of foreigners over the years, foreign to Taipei, who come to live in Taipei for a time or stay here. And it really grows on them. That's the phrase we would use. That means they get addicted to it. They just fall in love with it. It's a really easy place to fall in love with. Don't you feel that way too?
I really do feel that way. Initially when I came to Taipei, I was only planning to stay for 2 years. 2 years at the most. Well, guess what? I've been here for over 5.5 years now.
Yeah, see, you fell in love with it as well. And there's so many aspects of this place that make it such a wonderful place, right? The people, the hospitality, the food. Okay. Well, there's something at the end of this sentence that we want to talk about, and that is the use of those two words, of whom, okay? I have made new friends here, many of whom are locals. That of whom is describing the plural noun in the previous part of the sentence. So she's talking about the friends.
That's right. For example, I have lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins, many of whom love spicy food, just like me.
All right, so you could use the word many. You could use something else like several of whom love spicy food. Maybe you have many of something, but only 2 or 3 like something. So I have many relatives, 2 of whom like spicy food, if you want to just talk about the 2. Now, just so you know, if you want to make that 2 sentences, you would say it like this. I have made new friends here. Many of them are locals. Okay, so if it's 2 sentences, that second word would not be whom, it would be them.
And we read here, through my interaction with them, I've noticed some interesting cultural differences. Now, of course, our lesson is talking about eating out, and that involves food. Have you heard of the phrase food for thought?
You know what? I always like to get some good food for thought from
the Info Cloud.
Hello friends, welcome to InfoCloud. I have been teaching on InfoCloud for almost 2 years now. I have to say, the biggest challenge for me is coming up with ideas about what to teach every single day.
Well, I like to write down phrases from conversations I have with studio classroom teachers or from books and magazines. Usually those provide me with a lot of food for thought.
Food for thought. That's what I need when I'm thinking about lesson ideas. Let's talk about that expression, food for thought. It is something that inspires you to think, isn't it?
It is. Food for thought refers to the ideas and inspiration that fuel your thinking. Gandhi's life story gives me much food for thought about how to live my own life.
Food is what gives the body nutrition and energy to function normally and continually. Food for thought is something that keeps the mind going. It keeps you thinking in a very productive and creative way.
Although food for thought is mostly used in a positive way, it could come from something negative, like a tragedy or painful experience that make people think about what really is important in life.
Well, I hope you enjoyed those commercials. Welcome back to Studio Classroom. Now, in our lesson today, we have learned so far that it's in the form of a letter from a girl named Margaret. She's an exchange student from America living in Taipei or staying in Taipei for the time being. And she's noticed several cultural differences, especially when it comes to eating out. What are those differences? Let's find out right now.
Cultural differences of eating out. One of the most obvious cultural differences is the size of food portions in restaurants. Back home, The food servings are usually larger than those I've seen in Asia. We're even used to seeing supersized options in some restaurants. However, in Asia, food portions are generally not overwhelmingly large. I'm just encouraged to eat until I'm full and enjoy the variety of food. Eating out in Asia is often a big social affair. People here eat out a lot. There are all kinds of restaurants. And there are food stands and food carts, even on the sidewalk.
Let's get right into this section where Margaret is writing about some of the differences that she has seen or that she's observed as far as it comes to eating out. All right, so one of the most obvious cultural differences is the size of food portions in restaurants. And it's true. That's one of the things that I notice whenever I go to the United States to visit relatives or friends. And Rebecca, last time I went with my uncle to IHOP, the International House of Pancakes. And it's a great restaurant. We went there for breakfast. But here in Taiwan, I'm used to eating danbing, something simple like 萝卜糕 danbing, something like that with a hong cha. And there you order just a simple thing like pancakes, but then it comes with like sausages, eggs, and the pancakes are huge. And I couldn't finish it. I had to take some of it to go to eat later.
Oh, so you brought some of the pancakes home with you to eat perhaps for the next
lunch?
breakfast? Oh, for lunch?
Or like a snack or something like that. Yeah. Do you notice that when you go back to the States? Like the portions are huge.
And guess what? The prices are also much higher because the portions are so much bigger. That is definitely something I have also noticed. If you go to a restaurant in the States, you will tend to get portions that are much, much bigger, and I can never finish it all. It's too much food.
And something for you to keep in mind, friends, if you haven't traveled to the United States yet and eaten at a Chinese restaurant there, it's true there too. The portions will be sometimes twice or three times larger than you might get served at a Chinese restaurant here. So keep that in mind and don't order too much. All right, that's just something to keep in mind.
Because a lot of people do tend to order too much and then they can't eat all the food. And sometimes it goes to waste. Now we continue on with this letter. We read, back home, the food servings are usually larger than those I've seen in Asia. And that's exactly what we've been talking about, right? What about that phrase, back home?
Right. So Margaret says, back home. Now, home here in our lesson is not referring to the house where Margaret grew up or where she's from. It's talking about the country or her hometown. And that's how we use this phrase when talking to somebody about our hometown or home country. We say back home.
That's right. So, of course, if you are a local, Taiwanese or Chinese, and you're living in America and you talk about back home, of course, you're talking about your home country. But of course, since I live here in Taipei, if I say back home, I'm talking about America. So back home, I like to eat cheese and bread for breakfast every morning.
Oh, that's a pretty simple breakfast.
It is pretty simple, but of course, that is in my home. If I go out to a restaurant, it might be different.
Yeah, probably a little bigger, right?
Probably.
Yeah, because the portions are huge. Well, what do you like to have back home? When you're visiting abroad, do you ever miss anything back home? You can use this phrase to talk about the things that you miss as well. Okay. So, the food servings are usually larger, just like, maybe like a big plate of pasta. I'm just used to having a little bit of pasta right in the middle, but sometimes those pasta servings are huge. How is this guy going to finish all of this pasta?
That's a very good question. He might not actually finish it all, even though he's really trying.
Yeah, all right. Well, friends, we see here, we're even used to seeing supersized options in some restaurants. Especially fast food restaurants, okay? Now, this picture is a little bit ridiculous. It's a supersized burger. Usually, supersized means that the other things are supersized. That is, the fries and the drink are big. But the burger will probably remain the same size.
But in some restaurants, you can definitely buy a much larger, or there might be an option for a much larger burger that does have 2 or 3 patties on it. And of course, the patty refers to the meat on the hamburger.
That's right. Like the famous restaurant In-N-Out, they have what's known as the animal style burger, which is, you could ask for as many patties as you want, I think. And they're pretty big, right? That is a supersized meal. But we continue. However, in Asia, food portions are generally not overwhelmingly large. I'm just encouraged to eat until I'm full and enjoy the variety of food. And her use of the word encourage there is not that someone's saying, hey, you can do it. It's just that someone is saying, hey, that's okay, just eat until you're full.
And that's actually the healthiest way to eat. Eat until you're full. We read eating out in Asia is often a big social affair. Now we want to take a look at those words, social affair. What is this all about?
Okay, so a social affair is a time or an event that involves a lot of people getting together for a good time. The key idea is that you're getting together for fun or for a good time. If you have a big conference or a meeting for work, that's not considered a social affair.
That's right. For example, Katrina enjoys drinking a glass of wine once in a while, but only during a social affair.
And there are so many different kinds of social affairs, maybe like network events or certain company parties could be social affairs as well, like or maybe the Chinese New Year Gala in China is a big social affair, right? Or the red carpet, the Oscars, that's another kind of social affair. But we read here, people here eat out a lot. There are all kinds of restaurants, and there are food stands and food carts even on the sidewalk, and that is one of the best things I like about living here is the street food, the night market food. It's excellent.
Well, friends, we've really been talking a lot in English, right? Well, now it's time for you to practice your English with Say it in English.
Go ahead. Excuse me, could you help me? Excuse me.
Sure. How can I help you?
There is a mistake on my bill. I ordered 2 cheeseburgers, but the bill lists 3 cheeseburgers. Mistake. List.
Okay, let me check the order. I'm sorry we made a mistake. I'll type up a new bill.
Check. Okay. Thanks.
Here is the new bill.
This is correct. Thank you.
You're welcome.
卤肉饭 and 甜不辣 and oh, yes, friends, good to see you again. And it is good to practice conversations with other people in English. You know what? We've learned a little bit about the cultural differences of eating out, at least in the United States versus some places in Asia. In Asia, a lot of people like to make it a big social affair. Well, next time we're going to continue learning about a few more differences, so be sure to join us then, right here on Studio Classroom. I'm going to get some of that 卤肉饭 right now. Call some friends. Good to see you guys.